This is a subject very dear to my heart, and putting breath and nature together to me is heaven. Personally, I felt most alive and my breathing was most full when I was
Mm,
engaged in activity, playing sports, and particularly when I was in nature. I would climb trees. I remember climbing a tree when I was 11 years old
mm,
and feeling the connection with all of nature. And I said to myself at that time, I will never forget this moment. And I never
mm,
have. It felt like the tree itself was a
mhm.
bridge between heaven and earth. And I was being given a glimpse, as it were, of how I could be and was that connection between heaven and earth. And so we were breathing together, breathing the tree. That carried over into my interest in helping people, which started out in psychology. But I knew that it was more than just verbal help needed. And that brought me to looking at therapies that involve the soma and
Mm,
just the psyche. And so Alexander Lowen was one of my great teachers. And his teacher, Wilhelm Reich, very much used vocalization and deep tissue body work. But Alexander Lowen recognized that what that actually energized in people was their breath. His wife was a physical therapist, and he recognized that when he would engage people's breathing more fully, well, they became more insightful. They
mm.
were more ready to make changes that actually were permanent rather than just having an interesting thought, which fades quickly once you leave a therapy room, because he would give them practices, things that
Yeah.
would stretch their bodies, literally stretch their bodies. Breath was a part of ancillary, something that was very necessary, but it wasn't just focused on breath. And that didn't come along until Leonard Orr revived some of the ancient traditions. Now, even in yoga, breath is part of asanas. It's part of the practice, even just laying down. It's still not the main thing that you come for, breathing.
Yeah.
Now, breath work, that's the center stage. And we add verbal counseling, and we add somatic movement, and we add other things to it. So that shift then happened in the 1970s. And I was fortunate to be part of that. In fact, I was taking Tai Chi at the time. Our Tai Chi teacher came from New York, and I live in the Midwest. That's 1,000 miles away, but wanted to have a good teacher that we would bring him in. And he said, oh, he had met this gentleman, Leonard Orr, who was focusing on faster than normal breathing and having some very interesting results. And at that time, my wife and I had just purchased our first home, and it had a nice attic space, a room there. And we said, well, we're going to reserve that for traveling teachers.
Mm.
And so we had the first breath workers come to the Midwest during that time. And wow, this is something. After 2 sessions, I went and I was teaching bioenergetics at the time, and I was teaching a Monday evening class, and all of a sudden, one of the students in the class laid on the floor and started breathing, just like I was instructed to, in my breathwork session, or rebirthing as it was called at that time. And so I knew that I either had to tell her to stop doing that or to coach her like I was coached. And it was like, okay, I'm hooked. And so I then went to every breathworker training that I could get. Mostly they were on the East Coast or the West Coast at that time. But that was certainly the beginning, as you know, of a mushrooming, of taking older technique. Taoists had thousands of breathing techniques. So we didn't like discover breath. Breath has always been there, used medically, used psychologically and emotionally, and also used spiritually. But what we got to do now was to add some things that hadn't been in the more hierarchical forms of society at that time, where there was just one teacher or a group of teachers who knew it all, and you had to go to them and study for 20 years in order to be allowed to share with anyone else. We found that in community and in working in group, well, people had an innate desire and ability that could be trained and could be educated to be ethical, help one another. That then started a groundswell of moving around the world with breathwork. At the same time, I was still very interested in the aliveness that I experienced in nature. So part of my school was for everyone to learn wet breath work, dry breath work, group breath work, and breathing in nature. I was also being trained in wilderness work with Tom Brown Jr. And so I was fortunate to go and train with him and learn ways of reading the body of the earth. It was called the tracker because he could look at a track and tell you not just what animal, but how long ago the animal was there, and if that animal had any injuries, in essence, somewhat of their life history at a track. How is that possible? Well, I think we are trackers, as it were, of the breath. And just watching a person take one breath is like dropping a pebble in a pond and watching the ripples go out from head to toe. Any place where there's holding, any place where there's restriction, well, that ripple of energy will tell you. And I believe breath workers build a repertoire or a database, as it were, of knowledge and just being with people and watching their breathing and then experimenting, which I love the experimental attitude, not like, oh, I tried it this way, it works for me, so it should work for you. No, I tried it this way. Some of this worked. Are you willing to experiment and make it your own? See what works for you. Part of my ritual right now, every Friday, I go to the woods and I climb a tree. So it's just part of creating daily practices that take you to the timeless place. Our brain gets mired in like a train, boxcars in a train going down a track. We need to like step outside of that. One of the things we did with Tom Brown in school is we did a workshop called A Week in the Woods with a Knife and a Blanket. There you are in the woods. You got a knife and a blanket. That's it. Build your own house, your own food. So you can put yourself in extreme situations like that. But as Tom Brown also says, you can go in your backyard. He lived in Central Park in New York City for 3 months without being detected. So it's like it's right around us. We don't have to go to the ends of the earth. I mean, it's great to do that. I love doing that, and I have done that, and I will. But don't think that that's the only place. That's a place that will wake you up, and now you want to keep that spirit of aliveness within you. So the highness is within us. So for me, I plan today, I wrote down in my little journal right over here, which I dedicate, just like every breathwork session, it's got a yin and a yang to it. You have an intention, here's what I want in the session, and then you let go and you deal with what really happens when you breathe. And so I have an intention. My intention was to have a great conversation with you today. I wrote it right down there. But the aliveness comes in actually talking with you. That's where I feel most alive, is in the now. I right now have over 400 free YouTube videos. Connect with me if you're interested in doing a week-long retreat coming up in August, 14th to the 18th, here in the United States. Every other year we do that residential retreat, and it's also virtual now. Absolutely. It's been a true pleasure to be with you.